The night Natalie never came home. What happened inside that room? And why did the evidence make it look as though Natalie Brooks had been alone? 10:42 p.m. Queens, New York. Natalie Brooks had gone out for dinner that evening expecting an ordinary night. Instead, investigators would soon be standing outside a secured room where Natalie had been found dead. For her family, the hardest part was not simply losing Natalie. It was discovering that the last known person connected to her that evening had given investigators a different account of what happened. Earlier that night, Natalie had been at a Brooklyn restaurant. Claire Whitmore, the restaurant manager, remembered seeing her arrive. She also remembered Natalie leaving later that evening. But Natalie did not leave without speaking to Adrian Mercer. Adrian told investigators that the evening had been uneventful. At first, there was no reason to challenge that account. Then Natalie was found inside a secured room in Queens. The circumstances immediately raised questions. Who had brought Natalie there? How had the room been secured? And why did Adrian's account leave a gap in the timeline? Investigators knew they could not solve the case by looking at the locked door alone. They needed to reconstruct every known minute of Natalie's final evening. If Adrian had nothing to hide, why couldn't his version of the evening account for every hour? 9:18 p.m. Brooklyn. Claire Whitmore remembered Natalie at the restaurant. Brooke Ellis, a server that evening, remembered Natalie speaking with Adrian before leaving. Those details gave investigators their first reliable starting point. Then they examined Natalie's phone activity and other available records. The timeline became less straightforward. Natalie had left the restaurant. Adrian said they had separated shortly afterward. But investigators could not immediately account for Natalie's movements between the restaurant and the Queens location where she was later found. That gap mattered. Vanessa Cole, Natalie's close friend, gave investigators another piece of information. She explained that Natalie's relationship with Adrian had recently become strained. Natalie had not told Vanessa that she feared him, but she had become increasingly uncomfortable with the relationship. That made Adrian's timeline more important. Investigators now had a simple question. Where was Adrian during the hours he could not clearly explain? The room looked impossible at first, but Detective Marcus Bennett refused to let the door decide the case. 11:06 p.m. Queens. Natalie was discovered inside a room with the door secured. There was no obvious explanation for how she had entered or how the room had been secured afterward. For her family, the circumstances were devastating. Natalie had gone out for dinner. Now investigators were trying to understand how she had ended up there. Marcus Bennett began reconstructing the scene. Jordan Reeves examined the room and the condition of the door. They were looking for something much more useful than an unusual-looking lock. Evidence that could establish who had access and when. Thomas Avery, the building superintendent, explained how the building's access worked. His information eliminated one assumption investigators had initially made. The room could be secured without proving that someone had been trapped inside. That changed everything. The locked door was no longer the central mystery. The real question became, who had access to Natalie before the door was secured? The locked room had created confusion. Adrian's timeline was creating something more serious. Marcus Bennett compared the physical evidence with the known movements of Natalie and Adrian. Thomas Avery's information about building access gave investigators a clearer picture of how someone could have entered the building. But access alone did not identify anyone. Then Vanessa Cole provided investigators with something important. She described the recent problems between Natalie and Adrian. Natalie had become distant. She had also told Vanessa that Adrian's behavior during their relationship had changed. Adrian maintained that he had not spent significant time with Natalie after leaving the restaurant. But investigators now had two things to compare: his statement and the developing timeline. They did not match perfectly. Investigators needed another witness, and they had one: Brooke Ellis. Brooke remembered something Adrian had left out. Brooke told investigators that Natalie had received a phone call shortly before leaving the restaurant. Natalie's mood changed afterward. She appeared upset. Then she spoke with Adrian. The conversation was brief, But Brooke remembered something Adrian had not mentioned. They did not leave the restaurant at the time Adrian had originally described. Investigators compared Brooke's statement with Claire's recollection and Adrian's account. The sequence began to separate into two different versions. Adrian said he left before Natalie. The witnesses placed him with Natalie later than he had acknowledged. That did not automatically prove he had killed her, but it established something investigators could no longer ignore. Adrian had not given them the complete timeline. For Natalie's family, that discovery was painful. Because now the question was no longer simply, what happened to Natalie? It was, why was Adrian changing the story about the last time he saw her? Investigators finally found the piece that connected the restaurant to the Queen's location. Marcus Bennett reconstructed the evening again. Claire's statement placed Natalie at the restaurant. Brooke's statement established the conversation before she left. Adrian's account placed him somewhere else. The three accounts could not all be accurate. Investigators reviewed the available records surrounding Natalie's movements. One record placed Adrian closer to Natalie's final known location than he had admitted. It did not, by itself, prove that he had killed her, but it directly challenged his statement. Now investigators had a clear contradiction. Adrian had told them he was somewhere else. The evidence placed him near Natalie, and that brought the investigation back to the secured room. If Adrian had been near Natalie and had not told investigators the truth about his movements, what happened after they were together for the last time? That was the question that would finally connect the timeline to Natalie's death. The locked room had made the case look impossible. The timeline made it understandable. Investigators compared the witness statements, building information, physical evidence, and records surrounding Natalie's final movements. The evidence established that Adrian had been with Natalie during the critical period he had previously denied. His original account could no longer be reconciled with the evidence. The secured room had not been an impossible mystery. It had been part of an attempt to obscure what happened before Natalie was found. Adrian Mercer was arrested and charged in connection with Natalie's death. The investigation had not been solved by one dramatic discovery. It was solved by contradictions. A witness remembered one detail. Another witness remembered another. The building information eliminated a false assumption. And Adrian's own timeline eventually stopped making sense. For Vanessa Cole and Natalie's family, the answer could never undo the loss. Natalie had left home expecting an ordinary evening. She never returned. But her family was no longer left wondering what had happened to her. The locked room had created the mystery. The timeline revealed the truth. Natalie deserved to be remembered for the life she lived, not simply for the circumstances of her death. And when the evidence finally came together, her family received the one thing they had been waiting for, an answer. If you want more crime stories where one overlooked detail can change everything, subscribe to The Veil of Secret.